and welcome to ARIRANG News. It's Friday, October 10th here in Korea. Live from Seoul, I'm Laah Hyun-kyung. North Korea's demand to block the cross-border spread of anti-Pyongyang leaflets was not enough to stop a South Korean activist group from doing exactly that. Now, they have the South Korean government worried that their actions may have a destabilizing effect on inter-Korean relations. Our Myung-kil starts us off.
A South Korean activist group has gone ahead with its plan to fly anti-Pyongyang leaflets across the border on Friday, despite warnings from the North that they would retaliate, as the day marks the founding anniversary of the North's ruling Workers' Party. North Korea's agency in charge of inter-Korean relations had said that if Seoul did not stop the group, fighters for a free North Korea from going ahead with its plan, relations between the two Koreas could crumble.
If the South Korean authorities allow the leaflet scattering operation, North-South relations will again be pushed to an uncontrollable catastrophe, and Seoul will have to bear the responsibility.
Seoul's Unification Ministry had asked the activists to think carefully and scrap the plan, to give the ministry the best possible chance of improving inter-Korean ties at such a critical time. However, the government had also said it had no legal grounds to stop the group, a position that allowed it to distance itself from the issue. Tensions have been raised since an exchange of fire earlier this week after a North Korean naval vessel violated the Western maritime border. Seoul sees the move as a way for Pyongyang to position itself favorably ahead of planned high-level talks between the two Koreas. The activist group, mostly composed of North Korean defectors, routinely flies propaganda leaflets across the border into the north, prompting protests by Pyongyang. Myung-kil, ARIRANG News.
Meanwhile, the talk of the town regarding North Korea of late is centered on the whereabouts of its leader, Kim Jongun. The regime is celebrating the anniversary of the ruling Workers' Party's founding on this Friday, as we said, but Kim's name was absent from a list of party officials who paid tribute to the late leaders Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il at the Kumsusan Palace of the Sun. Now, Pyongyang's state-run Korean Central News Agency reported that the young leaders sent flowers instead. Kim Jong-un has not been seen in public for more than a month now, but Kim Yang-gun, the director of the party's United Front Department, told South Korean officials last Saturday that the young leader does not have any health problems. The party's anniversary is one of the most important events in North Korea, and Kim attended the ceremony last year. And staying with North Korea, the U.S. ambassador to South Korea says Washington is planning to test new forms of dialogue with the North. In a recent interview with the South Korean daily Joseonilbo, Sung Kim said the existing six-party framework is still valid, but the U.S. is willing to hold 3- or 4-way talks or even a bilateral meeting with Pyongyang. The six-party talks were aimed at denuclearizing North Korea. The two Koreas, the U.S., China, Japan, and Russia were involved, but the talks have been stalled since 2008. Their interview comes as Kim is scheduled to end his term as the U.S. ambassador to South Korea later this month. So the U.S. is open to different forms of dialogue, but that doesn't mean its North Korea policy will change. This was reaffirmed in an exclusive interview with a former senior U.S. diplomat. Our Hwang Sung-hee sat down with James Kelly, who says there's a reason why Pyongyang is turning to Seoul a lot more these days.
It's interesting that with all the divisions in the American Congress, for example, they are unanimous on not wanting to give any money to North Korea. And as we've seen historically, when North Korea can't get anybody else to give them good things, they turn to their South Korean brothers. And this is good news, because any resolution of this issue is going to be done by Koreans on the Korean Peninsula, and not by Americans and not by Chinese.
Now that China is sort of taking a bigger role in the international sanctions against the North, and it's also becoming pretty close with South Korea, do you think that Pyongyang would want to come back to the six-party talks knowing that it might be outnumbered?
North Korea has never wanted the six-party talks. Certainly at the early stages, it was much more of a 5+1. And when you really get into the issues, all five parties, not including North Korea, all five parties want a denuclearization of weapons on the Korean Peninsula. But I would say that the six-party talks was really the first time that South Korea had a prominent and equal position to everyone else.
Based on your experience as a chief U.S. envoy to North Korea, you've led numerous nuclear talks. Do you think it's ever possible for North Korea to fully give up its nuclear program, or have we come too far to hope for that?
It's possible, but it's not very likely. The nuclear program has benefits that have nothing to do with nuclear weapons or military deterrence or anything else. It is a vehicle that gets North Korea, that would otherwise be one of the more impoverished countries of the whole world, attention on the international stage that it couldn't get any other way. But I see the nuclear weapons question and the whole question of North Korea's isolation and its economic self-isolation from the rest of the world as very closely related problems. And so when you take care of one set of these problems, the others are going to become easier. If North Korea becomes seriously involved in world trade and interactions with other countries, it's going to be less interested in boasting about nuclear weapons that it may or may not have.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly, for your time today.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here.
Korea's Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan and Bank of Korea Governor Lee Ju-yeol are both attending the IMF and World Bank meeting in Washington. And based on the words coming out of Washington, experts say there is a very subtle difference between how Korea's top two financial authorities view the right path of recovery for the Korean economy. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports.
There's mounting pressure on the Bank of Korea to lower the country's main benchmark interest rate from the current 2.25%. It is expected to make a decision on the rate next Wednesday. The government, which is planning to inject an additional $4.7 billion into the economy on top of other stimulus programs this year, has called for stimulus monetary measures as well. But the central bank chief has a different recipe for the economy. Bank of Korea Governor Lee Ju-yeol said Thursday in Washington that there was little to nothing that a rate cut could do on its own to induce growth, suggesting that other measures will be needed. A rate cut could actually increase the country's debt in the long term, ultimately constraining domestic demand, since the policy would induce households and businesses to spend more despite their growing debt. Instead, Governor Lee highlighted a need for structural changes to induce growth that would bridge the gap between the manufacturing and service sectors and between large conglomerates and small and mid-sized companies. Meanwhile, there are differences of opinion on how the Korean economy is doing. Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan says the economy will grow in the upper 3% range this year, while the BOK scaled back its previous projection to the mid-3% range. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
Worries over the impact of the weakening Japanese yen on Korean businesses had been there for quite some time now, and for a good reason. London-based Clarkson Research Service says Japan's shipbuilding orders in September lodged more than 550 100,000 compensated gross tons or CGTs. That's about 27% of the global total. Those of Korean shipbuilders stood at around 420,000 CGTs, marking the third time this year that Japan's figure surpassed Korea's. And shifting gears now, following last month's expansion of a so-called Creative Economic Innovation Center in Korea's southeastern city of Daegu, the central city of Daejeon marked the expansion of another such center on this Friday. The center is the second of the government's 17 designated innovation centers to have signed agreements with a private firm to offer counseling and financial aid to local small and mid-sized companies and ventures. The Daejeon Center will focus specifically on ICT and energy. Marking the occasion, President Park vowed support for the most innovative startups to be listed on the KONEX stock market and also offered to help them make inroads into Silicon Valley. Tech officials from nearly 200 countries will flock to Busan next week for the 2014 International Telecommunication Union meeting. The ITU is a UN-affiliated organization, and it's the first time Korea is hosting this conference after joining the group more than 50 years ago. Our Song Ji-sun has this report.
It is the world's oldest international organization, originally established to promote cross-border cooperation in wire telegraphs. It is now high-tech, with an agenda that extends to managing satellite orbits, but advanced technology is no longer the only concern for the 193 countries that participate in the ITU plenipotentiary. Narrowing the information gap between nations is one task, as is sharing ICT policy experience and directions to set a common vision for the future by discussing issues like cybersecurity and child online protection. A day before the official kickoff of the ITU Plenipotentiary Conference, the annual ICT ministerial meeting, hosted by Korea for a decade now, will be held at Busan's APEC House under the theme The Future Role of ICT and Sustainable Development with Inclusive ICTs.
Korea hopes to boast its reputation as an ICT powerhouse at this event. It will be a completely paperless conference where all participants will receive updated information on their tablet PCs and smartphones throughout the sessions. We've also set up giga-scale landlines and mobile connections for that.
After hosting the event, the Korean government hopes the impression left on participants helps domestic ICT corporations expand their export channels. The Ministry of Science, ICT and Future Planning also seeks to use this opportunity to promote Seoul's creative economy models by encouraging small and mid-sized companies to exhibit their ideas and products at multiple expos held throughout the 3-week conference. Song Ji-sun, ARIRANG News.
Now, there's no denying that the impact of the ever advancing technology, rather, is being felt in every aspect of our daily lives. For example, even when listening to music. Long gone are the days when you had to wait for CDs to come out. Now, this is great for music lovers, but for artists, it has its pros and cons. Shin Se-min tells us more.
Downloading and streaming services have given music lovers unlimited access to their favorite albums, but for the artists themselves, the technology is a double-edged sword. 4-time Grammy Award-winning record engineer Jimmy Douglas says the shift has made it much more difficult for musicians and record companies to generate profits.
Even though we seem to have entered a new age where the record companies don't quite have the same hold, now the money's gotten away, and now the streaming people have hold of the money. So what happens is the little guy gets totally pushed out of the way, and the big guy is now making more money, which is great for them, but it's just not equitable.
And while the effects of the fast-changing nature of technology has had negative effects, musicians have also used it to their advantage for free publicity.
And sometimes it even leads to contracts with actual record labels. Such was the case with Eastern Sidekick, a Korean indie rock band.
At first, we started out small, but after a couple of gigs at clubs in Hongdae and putting some of our performances online, the size of the crowds grew and grew, and this is where we are now.
Count business manager Eric Sussman among those who have benefited from the changing times. Through a Kickstarter campaign along with the now famous Amanda Palmer, the duo raised more than $1 million in just 18 months. Sussman said similar campaigns could be a good fit for Korean musicians.
Especially with how wired Korea is, it seems to me that getting the message out ought to be very easy. And the more people you reach, the higher your chances of finding the people that will support you. And in that sense, I think the market here is ripe for this kind of action.
Insiders say newcomers will have to take full advantage of the technology already established in Korea to make themselves heard by the masses. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
$370 million is how much Chinese tourists in Korea are estimated to have spent during their week-long National Day holiday last week. The Korea Tourism Organization says about 164,000 Chinese visitors came to Korea during the holiday, which ended this past Tuesday. That's up 38% from last year. The organization expects the total number of Chinese visitors to reach 5 million by this month and 6 million by the end of the year. The scope of creativity extends beyond our imagination, and that was certainly the case with some of the future-oriented vehicles unveiled this week during Hyundai Motor's Idea Festival. Here's our Kim Min-ji with a glimpse at a few examples.
This vehicle can rotate 360 degrees, move in zigzag patterns, and easily fit into small parking spaces. When driving down narrow roads, it can even make itself smaller.
I developed this car to make driving fun, easier, and more convenient for inexperienced drivers, like my wife.
Although this car looks like an average SUV, the internal layout is what makes it special. The doors can be lifted so it's able to turn into a camping tent structure, and the seats are detachable and can transform to become their own modes of transportation. Dubbed Space Former, this car was awarded first place for its unique idea and its potential for mass production.
I wanted to make a car which users no longer think of as a mere mode of transportation, but a part of their life space.
Depending on their purpose, these vehicles can be transformed into SUVs or trucks, change the structural layout of tires, or can even be attached to one another.
Although the ideas are small, there are so many that can be fused with vehicles. We saw great potential for the future.
Another form of vehicle that caught the attention of spectators were single modes of transportation, including ones that combine with automatic wheelchairs and crutches. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
Bringing you the fresh updates from stories breaking in Korea and abroad. We give you a bigger and better picture of the world. Join Laah Hyun-kyung live from Seoul. Every weekday, only on ARIRANG.
Roughly 9 out of 10 residents in a city in Korea's Gangwon-do province say they don't want a nuclear power plant in the neighborhood. But the Korean government has rejected the results of a local referendum on the issue. Our Kim Hyun-bin has the details, including on what grounds the government is rejecting the results.
As expected, residents of the city of Samcheok have rejected a referendum on a nuclear power plant in their city. 84.9% of the city's residents were against plant construction and only 14.4% for it. With the participation of over two-thirds of the city's 420,000 eligible voters. The referendum was hosted by the city and anti-nuclear power plant activists seeking to force the central government to retract the plan to build a plant.
Residents of Samcheok, we have won today. I am moved to tears by your support.
The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy says that the results are invalid on grounds the poll was arranged by a civic group and not by the official election management committee. The ministry has made it clear it will push ahead with the plan to build a plant. Pro-nuclear power plant groups have also questioned the poll's reliability.
We can't accept the results of a vote orchestrated to pursue interests of local government employees. It's an invalid exercise, so should be nullified.
The dispute over the plant between the residents and the government has gone on for 4 years, intensifying since the Fukushima nuclear power plant disaster in 2011. This isn't the first time the government has tried to build a nuclear power plant in Samcheok. Another plan was scrapped in 1998 due to citizen protests. Although the government has rejected the results of the Samcheok referendum on the basis that it was conducted independently, it accepted the results of another locally arranged referendum held in 2004. That year, a plan to build a radioactive waste disposal facility in Puan, southwest of Seoul, was scrapped after voters rejected it in a similar referendum. Despite international efforts to reduce the number of nuclear power plants, Korea has plans to build 7 additional plants by 2035. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
The Japanese government reportedly believes it will be difficult to come up with a breakthrough policy to resolve the issue of the Japanese military's wartime sexual slavery. Japan's Nihon Keizai Shimbun reported Thursday that the statement was made during a vice ministers meeting between Korea and Japan earlier this month, as well as the two countries' foreign ministers meeting last month. Now, the report comes a few days after Koichi Hagiuda, a special advisor for Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe within the ruling Liberal Democratic Party, said the Kono statement no longer holds validity. The Kono statement is an apology issued back in 1993 by a former Japanese chief cabinet secretary to the tens of thousands of women, mostly Korean, who were forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese military in the early 20th century. And more issues between Korea and Japan. The Japanese government has slammed Korean prosecutors' decision to indict a Japanese reporter on charges of defaming President Park Geun-hye. Speaking at a press conference on Thursday, Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga said freedom of the press should be respected and that the indictment was far out of the norms of the accepted wisdom in the international community. He also said the move would damage the two countries' ties. Tatsuya Kato, the head of the Seoul bureau of Japan's Sankei Shimbun newspaper, was indicted Wednesday on charges of making false claims in August about the president's whereabouts and activities on April 16th. That's the day of the Seoul ferry disaster. Now, over in Hong Kong, pro-democracy student protesters and high-level Hong Kong officials were set to meet this afternoon, but the formal dialogue has been called off. The territory's number 2 official, Chief Secretary Carrie Lam, made the announcement last night, saying calls by student leaders to return to protests had seriously undermined the basis for constructive dialogue. This as a political bombshell has hit the territory's chief executive, C.Y. Leung. Hong Kong lawmakers are demanding a thorough investigation after an Australian media outlet reported that the leader had accepted more than $6 million from an Australian company in a suspected bribe. Leung's office has denied any wrongdoings. Leaders at international organizations are raising their collective voice to act quickly to combat Ebola in West Africa. An Australian nurse who had served in Sierra Leone tested negative for Ebola, but with more suspicious cases being spotted around the globe, authorities and healthcare professionals continue to call for a swift mobilization of resources. At a conference in Washington, UN Chief Ban Ki-moon said the world needs a 20-fold resource mobilization to deal with the outbreak in West Africa, while World Bank President Myung-kil warned of catastrophic economic costs to the African continent if we fail to act now. U.S. authorities announced that they would add an extra layer of screening for Ebola at the country's 5 busiest international airports beginning Saturday local time. UK officials in the meantime said they would also screen travelers from Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea at their airports, as well as at Eurostar railway terminals.
Happy Friday, everyone. I'm Kim Bo-kyung with your weather updates. We have some rather hot autumn weather under clear skies to greet us as we head into the weekend. The daytime highs in most regions will be about 5 degrees above the seasonal average, but numbers will drop into the low teens as the night progresses. Now, not all regions are enjoying the sunshine as it's raining on parts of the eastern coast as an indirect effect of Typhoon Hongpong. Looking ahead to the weekend, we'll continue to see temperatures that are higher than the seasonal average along with strong winds. Also, we have rain in store down south on Sunday, which should drop through Monday. Moving on to the readings, Seoul will mix it to 27, Gwangju 28, and Busan 25. On to other regions, Daejeon reaches 26, Jeju will be at 23, Dokdo 20, and Myung-kil 12. That'll do it for Korea, and here's a look at the international weather.
And that's the end of our newscast. Thank you for watching. We'll be back with more news at 6 p.m. Korea time.